On the evening of July 28, 1865, a steamship left the harbor of San Francisco carrying passengers, mail, and something far more valuable. Hidden inside locked chests and cargo boxes was gold. Gold from the mines of California. Gold that miners had spent months digging out of the mountains. Gold that was supposed to travel north and change lives. The ship was called the Brother Jonathan. It was one of the most trusted steamships on the Pacific coast. People believed it could survive almost anything the ocean threw at it. But only a few hours after leaving port, the weather began to change. The wind strengthened. The waves grew higher. And somewhere in the thick fog off the coast of Northern California, the ship would encounter a disaster no one on board expected. Within hours, the Brother Jonathan would vanish into the ocean. More than 200 people would die, and somewhere on the ocean floor, the gold they carried would remain untouched for more than a century. Today, the wreck of the Brother Jonathan is remembered as one of the great lost treasure stories of the American West. Because when the ship went down, it didn't just take lives with it. It took a fortune. And for over 120 years, no one knew exactly where that fortune had gone. But before the storm, before the wreck, before the gold disappeared into the Pacific, there was a world obsessed with gold. And the Brother Jonathan was sailing directly through the heart of it. By the 1860s, the California gold rush had already transformed the American West. California Gold Rush, what began in 1848 as a discovery in a river near Sutter's Mill, quickly turned into one of the largest migrations in American history. Sutter's Mill. Hundreds of thousands of people traveled west in search of gold. Miners dug into mountains. They searched riverbeds. They blasted tunnels into rock. Some became rich. Most did not. But even when individual miners struggled, the mines themselves kept producing enormous quantities of gold. That gold had to move. It travelled in wagons, guarded by armed escorts. It crossed mountains and rivers. Eventually, it reached the ports of California. From there, ships carried the gold north to Oregon and Washington, or south toward Panama and the East Coast. Steamships became the arteries of the gold rush economy. Among them was the Brother Jonathan, a large sidewheel steamship built in New York in 1851. For years it carried passengers and cargo along the Pacific coast. It transported miners, merchants, soldiers, families, and sometimes enormous quantities of gold. By 1865, the ship had already completed dozens of successful voyages. Passengers trusted it. Merchants trusted it. And banks trusted it with something even more important: their gold shipments. On July 28, 1865, the Brother Jonathan prepared to leave San Francisco once again. The destination was Portland, Oregon. San Francisco, Portland. On board were businessmen, families, soldiers returning home after the Civil War, and dozens of crew members. Also on board were several heavy chests. Inside them was gold worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, a massive fortune in the 1860s. The voyage was expected to take just a few days, but shortly after leaving San Francisco Bay, the weather began to turn. Fog rolled across the Pacific. Wind whipped the waves higher and higher. Captain Samuel Derwool faced a decision: continue north through dangerous waters, or turn back. That decision would determine the fate of the ship and the gold that disappeared with it. The Pacific coast of Northern California has always been one of the most dangerous stretches of water in North America. Long before radar, GPS, or modern navigation systems, ships relied on experience, charts, and luck to move safely through the fog and rocks that lined the coastline. The stretch of ocean near Crescent City was particularly feared. Crescent City. Sharp reefs lay hidden just below the surface. Cold currents pushed ships toward the rocks, and dense fog could reduce visibility to almost nothing. Sailors had a name for these places. They called them ship traps. On the afternoon of July 28, 1865, the brother Jonathan pushed north through increasingly rough weather. At first, the storm did not seem catastrophic. Steamships like the brother Jonathan were powerful for their time. The ship's large paddle wheels churned through the waves while its boilers drove the vessel steadily forward. But as the ship approached the coast near Crescent City, the conditions worsened. Wind slammed into the vessel from the west. Heavy swells lifted the ship and dropped it violently back into the water. Thick fog erased the horizon. Captain Samuel de Wolfe, a highly experienced captain who had spent years sailing the Pacific coast, began to worry. The sea was growing too rough. More importantly, the visibility was getting worse by the minute. Some passengers later recalled that the ship began to slow down as the crew struggled to maintain control in the rising storm. At this point, the captain made a decision. He would turn the ship around and head back toward San Francisco. It seemed like the safest option, but the moment the brother Jonathan changed course, it unknowingly moved closer to one of the most dangerous rock formations along the entire coastline. Hidden beneath the waves was a reef called St. George Reef. St. George Reef. Ships had wrecked there before, and within minutes, the brother Jonathan would become one of them. The first sign that something was wrong came suddenly. Passengers later described hearing a deep grinding sound from below the deck. The ship shuddered violently. Then came the second impact. The brother Jonathan had struck the reef. St. George Reef sat just below the water's surface, a jagged formation of rock capable of tearing open even large ships. The collision ripped a hole in the hull. Cold Pacific water immediately began flooding into the lower sections of the vessel. Crew members rushed below deck. Within minutes, it became clear that the damage was severe. Water was pouring into the ship faster than the pumps could remove it. The crew tried to stabilize the vessel. Boilers roared as engineers attempted to keep the engines running. The idea was simple. If the ship could stay under power, perhaps it could reach shallow water before the flooding became uncontrollable. But the storm was now raging. Huge waves battered the damaged vessel. Water continued pouring into the hull. Passengers were ordered onto the upper decks. Some clutched their belongings. Others simply held onto the railings as the ship rolled in the violent sea. Then the captain gave the order everyone feared. Prepare the lifeboats. In theory, the brother Jonathan carried enough boats to evacuate many of the passengers. In reality, launching lifeboats in a violent Pacific storm was incredibly dangerous. Waves slammed into the sides of the ship. The wind tore at ropes and rigging. Still, the crew tried. One by one, lifeboats were lowered into the raging water. The first few boats immediately struggled against the waves. Some drifted away. Others capsized almost instantly. Meanwhile, below deck, the situation was becoming catastrophic. Water had reached the boilers. If the fires went out, the engines would stop completely. And if the engines stopped, the ship would lose the only power keeping it stable against the storm. Within minutes, that is exactly what happened. The boilers failed. The engines died. The brother Jonathan was now drifting helplessly in a violent Pacific storm, and the reef that had torn open the hull was still waiting beneath the waves. When the engines of the brother Jonathan stopped, the ship lost the only thing that had been keeping it stable in the storm. Without the engines turning the paddle wheels, the vessel could no longer fight the powerful Pacific currents. The waves pushed the damaged ship sideways. Every impact with the water drove more seawater through the hole in the hull. Below deck, crew members tried desperately to slow the flooding. They dragged heavy materials toward the breach in the ship's side, attempting to plug the opening. Others worked the pumps with exhausting speed, trying to remove water as quickly as it poured in. But the ocean was winning. Within minutes, the lower decks were filling rapidly. Above deck, chaos began to spread among the passengers. Many had realized that the ship might not survive. Families clung to one another. Some passengers prayed. Others rushed toward the lifeboats. But the storm made escape almost impossible. The waves were enormous, lifting the ship high and dropping it violently again. Each movement made it harder for the crew to safely lower the boats. One lifeboat managed to reach the water, but a massive wave immediately slammed it against the side of the ship, smashing it apart. Another boat drifted away into the fog, quickly disappearing in the violent sea. The crew tried again. They cut ropes. They pushed boats overboard, but each attempt became more desperate than the last. The captain remained on the bridge, watching the coastline through the fog. If the ship could somehow reach shallow water, perhaps people could swim to shore, but the reef had already done its damage. The ship was sinking, and time was running out. The entire disaster unfolded with terrifying speed. From the moment the ship struck St. George Reef, less than an hour passed before the brother Jonathan was beyond saving. Water continued pouring into the vessel. The ship began to tilt. Passengers struggled to keep their balance as the deck angled sharply toward the ocean. Some people jumped into the sea in desperation. Others held onto the ship, hoping another lifeboat might survive the waves. The storm showed no mercy. Waves smashed over the decks, sweeping people into the freezing Pacific water. Visibility had dropped to almost nothing. The fog and wind made it impossible to see more than a short distance in any direction. Some survivors later said the final moments felt unreal. The massive steamship that had safely travelled the Pacific coast for years was now helpless against the storm. The bow of the ship dipped lower and lower. Water rushed across the decks, and then the vessel began to break apart. The brother Jonathan slid beneath the surface of the Pacific Ocean. Hundreds of passengers and crew were thrown into the freezing water. Most had no chance. The cold ocean, violent waves, and powerful currents quickly overwhelmed them. Out of more than 240 people on board, only 19 survived. It became one of the deadliest shipwrecks on the Pacific coast, but the tragedy carried another mystery. Because somewhere inside the sinking vessel were heavy cargo chests. Locked inside them was gold. Gold from the mines of California. Gold belonging to banks, merchants, and private passengers. As the ship disappeared into the depths near St. George Reef, that gold vanished with it. And for more than a century, no one would know exactly where it had gone. When news of the disaster reached the Pacific coast, the story spread quickly. The loss of life was shocking enough, but another detail soon began circulating in newspapers and shipping offices along the west coast. The brother Jonathan had been carrying gold, not just a small amount carried by individual passengers. The ship had transported official gold shipments, including valuable coins and bullion that were being moved between banks and businesses along the Pacific coast. In the 1860s, gold from the mines of California still flowed constantly through the region's economy. Banks often shipped large amounts of gold by steamship. It was faster and safer than transporting it through the mountains by wagon. Among the gold believed to be on board were shipments belonging to San Francisco banks, private merchants, and wealthy passengers. Many of the coins were newly minted double-equal $20 gold coins, some of the most valuable American currency of the time. Double-equal. The estimated value of the gold on board was around $50,000 in 1865. At the time, this was a huge fortune. In modern value, it would equal many millions of dollars. But unlike some shipwrecks, where cargo floats free or washes ashore, the brother Jonathan had sunk quickly in deep water. No one saw the gold again, and no one knew exactly where the wreck had come to rest. The storm had scattered debris across the coastline. Bodies and pieces of the ship washed ashore in the days after the disaster. But the ship itself was gone. Somewhere beneath the cold Pacific water, the brother Jonathan lay hidden, along with the gold that had disappeared with it. For decades, the wreck remained one of the Pacific coast's greatest maritime mysteries. For more than 100 years, no one could find the wreck of the brother Jonathan. The ocean off Northern California is cold, deep, and extremely difficult to explore. Powerful currents sweep across the seafloor. Storms constantly reshape the underwater landscape. Even locating the exact place where the ship sank was difficult. Early search attempts failed. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, technology simply wasn't advanced enough to locate wrecks hundreds of feet below the surface. But by the late 20th century, things had changed. New underwater search technologies began transforming ocean exploration. One of the most important tools was side-scan sonar. This technology allowed researchers to map large areas of the ocean floor and identify unusual shapes that might be shipwrecks. In the 1980s, a team of explorers decided to search for the brother Jonathan once again. Their efforts were led by a marine researcher named Greg Stem, who believed the wreck could still be found. Greg Stem, the search area focused on the waters near St. George Reef, where survivors believed the ship had gone down. Using sonar scans and underwater equipment, the team slowly mapped the ocean floor. For months, nothing appeared. Just rocks, sand, and the shifting patterns of the seafloor. But then, in 1984, the sonar revealed something unusual. A large object resting deep beneath the water. The shape looked unnatural. Too large to be a rock, too structured to be random debris. Divers and submersible equipment were sent down to investigate. What they discovered confirmed the mystery. The wreck of the brother Jonathan had finally been found. After more than 119 years, the ship that had vanished in the storm had been located. But finding the wreck was only the beginning, because somewhere inside the wreck, the lost gold might still be waiting. Finding the wreck of the brother Jonathan was only the first challenge. The ship lay nearly 250 feet beneath the surface of the Pacific Ocean in cold, dark water, where storms and powerful currents made diving extremely dangerous. Even with modern technology, recovering anything from that depth would require careful planning. The exploration team used remotely operated cameras and specialized diving equipment to examine the wreck. What they found confirmed what historians had suspected for more than a century. The cargo was still there. Scattered across the wreck site were objects from the ship's final moments. Pieces of the wooden hull, broken cargo crates, personal belongings from passengers, and among the debris, gold coins, hundreds of them. Many of the coins were still in remarkable condition despite spending more than a century underwater. The ocean had hidden them, but it had also protected them. The most remarkable discoveries were $20 double equal gold coins, minted during the height of the gold rush. Double equal. These coins were made almost entirely of gold and were among the most valuable forms of currency in the United States during the 19th century. Divers carefully collected the coins and brought them to the surface. The discovery confirmed that the ship's legendary treasure had been real. Over time, thousands of artifacts were recovered from the wreck. Gold coins, gold bars, personal jewellery, historical objects that had been lost with the ship in 1865. For the first time in more than a century, the gold of the brother Jonathan had returned to the surface. But even as the treasure began to reappear, a new problem emerged. The question was no longer where the gold was. The question was who it belonged to. Recovering the gold from the brother Jonathan created one of the most unusual legal battles in American treasure hunting history. The exploration company that discovered the wreck believed the treasure rightfully belonged to them. After all, they had spent years searching for the ship and millions of dollars developing the technology required to locate it. But another group also claimed ownership. The state of California argued that the wreck lay within its coastal waters. Because of that, the state believed the treasure should legally belong to California. What followed was a long legal fight over the ownership of the treasure. The case eventually reached the United States Supreme Court, where judges had to decide who truly owned the gold that had been lost for more than a century. Supreme Court of the United States. In the end, the court ruled that the wreck belonged to the state of California because it rested within state waters. This meant that much of the treasure legally belonged to the state. However, the discovery team was allowed to keep a portion of the recovered artifacts as compensation for their work. The ruling became one of the most important legal decisions involving shipwreck treasure in the United States. But even after the legal battle ended, one fact remained clear. Only part of the treasure had been recovered. Large sections of the wreck were still buried beneath sand and debris, and many historians believe that some of the brother Jonathan's gold may still remain on the ocean floor today. The wreck of the brother Jonathan is no longer completely lost. Today, it is recognized as one of the most important shipwreck discoveries along the Pacific coast. Coins and artifacts recovered from the ship now appear in museums and private collections. They serve as reminders of a tragedy that unfolded in less than an hour on a stormy night in 1865. But the story also raises an interesting question. Was the treasure of the brother Jonathan fully recovered, or is part of it still hidden beneath the Pacific Ocean? Shipwreck sites often contain more cargo than explorers initially find. Storms bury objects under layers of sand. Pieces of wreckage scatter across the seafloor. Even after years of exploration, it is possible that some of the ship's gold still lies somewhere near St. George Reef. St. George Reef. More than 150 years after the ship vanished into the storm, the ocean still holds part of its story. The brother Jonathan reminds us that during the gold rush era, enormous fortunes moved constantly across dangerous land and sea. Sometimes they arrived safely, and sometimes they disappeared forever. But if new technology continues to explore the depths of the Pacific, one question remains open. Could there still be gold waiting beneath the waves? And if someone found it, would the treasure finally be exhausted? Or would the ocean reveal that the brother Jonathan still has secrets left to give?